In 1982, I lived in Thailand. I worked for 7 months in a Cambodian refugee camp about 50 kilometers from the Cambodian border. It was my job to make sure that 18,250 Cambodian refugees were fed. Everything that they ate came through my hands. I ran the entire feeding program. It doesn't mean I cooked all the meals, but I arranged for all the food to be brought into the camp and distributed, and cooking fuel in the whole thing. 56 tons of rice a week, 3,000 hot meals in the hospitals, 9 tons of fresh vegetables. Now, these dear people were the survivors of the Cambodian Holocaust from 1975 to 1979. This is when the Cambodian communists were in control of the country. And it wasn't until the Vietnamese attacked from the east in 1979 that broke the stranglehold of the Khmer Rouge, the Red Khmer or the Red Cambodians. And the people were allowed to flee and cross the border and take refuge in Thailand. And during those 4 years, starvation was commonplace. People ate snakes and bugs and even bark. Some women ate their own children. Executions were routine. People were tied to trees. They had plastic bags. If you've been in Southeast Asia, you know they use these little blue plastic bags for everything. They'd put them over their head, tie it. They'd suffocate. They'd eviscerate the people tied to trees and pull their guts out. They would, the slightest infraction would be a trip to execution. If you were educated, you spoke one word of French. If you wore glasses, you know, if you hid food, you would get executed. Infants were tossed into the air and impaled on bayonets. They were thrown in big tubs of water, and they were allowed to rot there, and then the people were forced to drink the water in the tub. They called it the baby broth. By the time the Vietnamese invaded and the Khmer flooded into Thailand, 2 million, according to Time magazine, had died. That's half of the population. Through starvation, torture, execution, the bodies were piled in ditches, they were hung from trees, they were floating in the rivers, they were bulldozed into mass graves. It came to be known as the killing fields. It's the greatest act of genocide ever perpetrated by one race on its own people. And the camp was thick with children, and I still have copies of pictures that the children, the 10, 12, 14-year-old children drew of their experiences, the blood-red graphic depiction of executions that these children witnessed. I mean, it's enough to make a person weep. But why do we weep? Oh, well, we're just being emotional. Are we? I think there's something else going on. There is a reason that we react to that. When we countenance what took place, or just what took place down the road here 50 years ago in Auschwitz. I saw a friend of mine yesterday who had made the trip out and was back. I say, hey, how are you doing? He said, I'm emotionally exhausted. When we countenance that, something occurs to us. We are not morally neutral. We understand what happened there, and the way we assess what happened there and in Cambodia is that the things that happened were, and what's the word we use to describe it? Evil. Now, I have another question of people who make that characterization of those behaviors. When you say the things were evil, are you describing yourself? Are you merely describing your feelings? Or are you describing your culture's assessment? Or do you mean to be describing the things themselves? And of course, to a person, they mean to be describing the things themselves. In other words, what they see are actions that took place that have the quality in themselves of evil. And if that's true, that is, if their assessment is accurate, then relativism is false.